Jesus has extended an invitation. And he has extended this invitation to everyone. That invitation is pretty simple. It's not overly complex, although some of us have a hard time doing it. And the invitation is simply this: come to me. Come to me. If you're carrying heavy stuff, if you're burdened, if you're hurting, he says, come to me, and I will give you rest for your souls. How you doing with that? How you doing with taking the stuff, the garbage, the junk, to him and leaving it with him? How you doing? Not well. Our lives are busy. There's a lot of noise. And there is no place on the planet that's noisier than your head. Your head is very, very noisy. It's filled with all kinds of things. So that means our soul is filled with all kinds of things. And if I'm going to walk with God, I'm going to know his presence, I have to make room for him. And I have to do that beyond Sunday morning for an hour. See, a lot of Christians are kind of like the people in your neighborhood. I know it's not you, but there are some people in my neighborhood that have a 2-car garage, and their cars are in the driveway because there is no room in the inn for their cars. And our souls are that way. Our souls are filled with so much stuff. And we got to make some room for God. Are you pausing? Are you taking those moments throughout your day, throughout your week, to say a very simple prayer? Jesus, I give you everyone and everything. I ask that you'd restore my soul to you. I need you. I love you. I worship you. How you doing? How you doing with the pauses? How you doing with making room for God? How are you doing with taking the burdens and the stuff to Jesus and leaving it there? Is it just a sermon? Is it just a sermon that we've talked about and that we've listened to in the past couple of weeks, and we've gathered today for a new word, a new something? How you doing? See, when you practice certain disciplines and taking the burdens and taking the stuff that's weighing you down and taking that to Jesus and leaving it with him, finding the space, creating the space to hear from God and to be with God and to acknowledge his presence with you. To discipline. Taking the time to pause and to say, Jesus, I give you everyone and everything. See, when we do those kinds of things, when we practice those kinds of disciplines, something will happen. And there's all kinds of other disciplines that we're to practice, obviously. But when we practice those kinds of things, you know what happens? Life becomes beautiful. You begin to notice beauty in places you've never noticed beauty before. You notice that there's some peace even in the midst of the chaos. See, your soul needs beauty and my soul needs beauty. We need beauty. And of course, beauty is in the eye of who? The beholder. And so there's all kinds of things that you may find beautiful. I mean, you may find the mountains beautiful. You may find the beaches beautiful. You may find the open prairies of the Midwest beautiful, or the swamps of southern Louisiana to be beautiful. You may find the candy apple red sports car to be beautiful. My oldest daughter, Madison, is all into trucks, and so when she finds the Silverado she likes, or she finds the Colorado she likes, and occasionally she throws in a Tacoma, and she'll say, "Dad, look, isn't she beautiful?" And I go, "Yeah." Because I'm not a car person. I'll be watching the football game, and the guy will make the one-handed catch, and tap the toes, and I jump up and go, "Oh, that's amazing. That's beautiful." And she says, "Yeah." So beauty comes in so many different things, and this morning we could spend some time and we could talk about all of the things that we find to be beautiful, and that there is a time and there is a place for that. But at the heart of it, what is beautiful is walking and living in the presence of the Almighty. That is what is beautiful. And today I want us to look at the story of Hannah. We have Hannah's story in 1 Samuel chapter 1 and chapter 2. It's located in the Old Testament. Some people call it the Hebrew Scriptures. But before I read some of those verses, I want to tell us the whole story of Hannah. But before we tell the whole story of Hannah, I want to make sure that we're on the right page. We understand what has happened up to Hannah. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's kind of where it starts. And he puts Adam and Eve in a garden, and then they fall. And then there's the flood. And then in Genesis chapter 12, there's this guy that he calls out. His name's Abraham. And he says, "I'm going to make you into a great nation." And Abraham has a son, Isaac, and then Isaac has a couple of sons, and one of those sons becomes known as Jacob. And Jacob's Abraham's grandson. And Jacob has a whole bunch of sons. His most famous son is Joseph, the one that has the coat of many colors and the one who ends up in Egypt. That's Abraham's great-grandson. And Joseph's in Egypt, and as all of his brothers end up in Egypt because of the famine and everything is going good. And then we get to Exodus chapter 1, and things have changed. And Exodus chapter 1 starts like this. "And the Pharaoh knew not Joseph." So instead of being in a place of privilege, the Hebrew children now are in a place of slavery. And God says, "Enough." And there was this guy, he had lived 40 years in the Egyptian palace, had the best of the best of the best of everything. And then he spent 40 years wandering around in a desert working for his father-in-law. His name's Moses. You may have heard of him. But this guy Moses is called to go deliver the children of Israel, the Hebrew children, out of Egypt. And so he goes, and there's the plagues and the parting of the Red Sea. And Moses finds himself back in the desert that he had been wandering around for 40 years, only to wander around another 40 years with a whole bunch of people. And you think you had a bad week. Well, Moses' life ends, and Yeshua shows up. He doesn't show up. He steps into his leadership, and he takes the Hebrew children into the promised land. And we get stories like Jericho and some other things. And then we get into the Judges. And we get into the Judges, you got guys like Gideon and Samson and Ruth. And out of that lineage of Ruth, the house of Boaz, We start getting some other names. And we find ourselves in 1 Samuel chapter 1. Israel is not a nation yet. Well, it's a nation. They've developed the promised land, but they haven't had a king yet. And they've at their place of worship, and that's established, and they've got their priests. They've got the tribe of Levi that are the priests, and you have the story of Hannah. Now, here's the story of Hannah. If you don't know the story of Hannah, Hannah is married. And Hannah is married to a guy named Elkanah. Now, Elkanah has 2 wives. I know. That's a problem. And if you leave today and the only thing on your mind is, how does Elkanah have 2 wives? And how is that in the Bible? And you're missing the point. I know, I'm aware. He has 2 wives. One of them is Hannah. And Hannah can't have a child. Now her sister wife is popping out babies left and right. And she says to make fun of Hannah and berate Hannah, and lets Hannah know that she doesn't count because she can't produce children for their husband. And so what Hannah does is when she goes to the priest Eli and they go for their annual trek there for their time of worship and sacrifice, she's praying, and she's praying that God would give her a son. And she's praying to herself. She's not praying out loud. She's praying to herself. And so her lips are moving, but nothing's coming out. And Eli, the priest, thought that Hannah was drunk. And Hannah has to say, no, I've not had any wine. I haven't had any beer. I'm praying for God to deliver me. Well, he does give her a son. And that son she dedicates to God. And I'm not talking about at a baby dedication at the service at the church and then takes them. I'm talking about she gives her son to the temple. Now that son is named Samuel. Now Samuel goes on to anoint the first king of Israel, Saul, and he's the one who anoints David to be king. Hannah's story is beautiful. I want us to look at some things in this story specifically. The first thing that I want us to look at is that Hannah took her hurt to God. Hannah took her hurt to God. If you look in 1 Samuel chapter 1 and you look in verse 10, it says, deeply hurt, Hannah prayed to the Lord and wept with many tears. Over in verses 15 and 16, says, no, my Lord, and she's talking to Eli the priest, I am a woman with a broken heart. I haven't had wine or beer. I've been pouring out my heart before the Lord. So here is Hannah. She's saying, she's acknowledging, I'm a person with a broken heart. I'm deeply hurt. I'm deeply wounded. And what we see Hannah doing is she's taking her hurt. She's taken her burden. She's taken where she is heavy laden, and she is taking it to God. She's taking it to the Father. Have you heard that you're to do this? Have you heard that when you're burdened and you're heavy laden, that Jesus has extended the ultimate invitation of, come to me, and I will give you rest for your souls. When we take our burdens to God, when we acknowledge our pain, when we acknowledge our hurt, it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. Not only did she take her hurt to God, she also committed herself to God. And she committed her son. If you give me a son, I will commit him to the Lord. And she says that in verse 11, and says, making a vow, she pleaded, Lord of armies, if you will take notice of your servant's affliction, remember and not forget me, and give your servant a son. And I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and his hair will never be cut." Notice she refers to God as the Lord of armies. I wonder why she would do that. You think Hannah had seen a little bit of warfare? See, the judges as went in, they're establishing, and there's a lot of fighting. And when God showed up, he'd show up with an army. So here's the Lord of the armies. And she said, I will dedicate him, I will give him. And one of the things that we know about Samuel, and we know a good bit about Samuel, one thing we know is that he had really, really long hair. How do we know this? It's kind of a simple thing. It's not going to make or break your week. But she said, we're never going to cut his hair. She took her hurt to God, and she also committed herself to God. And she committed her son. Third thing she did is that she followed through. In verses 26 and 28 of chapter 1, it says, "Please, my Lord," and again, my Lord here is think of talking to the priest as he's a king. "Please, my Lord," she said, "as surely as you live, my Lord, I am a woman who stood here beside you praying to the Lord. I prayed for this boy, and since the Lord gave me what I asked for, I now give the boy to the Lord. For as long as he lives, he is given to the Lord." Now, this story happens about 3,000 years ago, is when this took place. And so she's got this deep pain, and she goes to God. She takes her pain to God. She takes her sorrow. She takes where she's burdened. This is a beautiful thing. She commits to God. This is a beautiful thing. I don't know about you, but I find it beautiful when people are committed to God. Not only did she just say that she was committed to God, not only did she say she was going to give her son to the temple, she did. She followed through. So there's a lot of people who will take their pain to God, and there's a lot of people who will make a commitment, but there's not a whole lot of people who will follow through. When the sacrifice gets too much, when the call is too hard, they bail. Hannah does not. She took her hurt to God, she committed to God, and she followed through. And the fourth thing she did was she worshiped. Now, I don't want you to miss the picture here. The picture is she has taken her young son on this yearly trek for the sacrifices and all of the things that they were doing. But this time, she was going to go home without him. She was going to leave him at the temple. Now, if she was ridiculed by the sister wife for not having a child, can you imagine what was coming out her for finally having a child and then leaving him with the priest in the temple? Can you imagine what that trip home was like? And before she goes home, she worships. And she prays. And we have her prayer. And as I read her prayer, I want you to see her prayer as a confession, not as an explanation. I want you to see her prayer as a confession, not as an explanation. See, we live in a time, and we live in a society where everything has to be explained. Everything has to be explained. Your walk with God will be greatly hindered if you need an explanation for everything. If you can't rest in the beauty and the mystery of God, you're going to have a hard time. See this as a confession, not as an explanation. In chapter 2, we have her prayer, and she starts with, "My heart rejoices in the Lord. My heart rejoices in the Lord." Does yours? Does your heart rejoice in the Lord? Remember what she's doing and the trek she's about to make. And she's rejoicing in the Lord. Do you rejoice in the Lord? I know it's the church thing to say. Do you? Then she says, "My horn is lifted up by the Lord." That's kind of weird. Hannah carrying around a horn that God's lifting up. I mean, what's she talking about here? Well, that's what the biblical scholars think that she's saying here when she says that I rejoice in the Lord and my horn has been lifted up before him, and that the word picture she's painting here is the picture of a buck standing with his head up, with his antlers. We just moved here, it was 2006, probably the winter of 2007. The girls were little, and we went out to Red Rocks to hike. And we were coming from the swamps of southern Louisiana, so being around the mountains and hiking and no humidity, it's like, this is the best thing ever. And so we did all of these kinds of things, and we would go to Red Rock often. Amelia, who's back here, she just loved to hike, and we'd go hike for hours. Now, Amelia likes to stay on the trail for about 45 seconds. And so when we would go hiking, we would make our own trails. Don't tell anybody, but we would make our own trails, and we would go and we explored every kind of thing about Red Rocks. And on one Saturday morning, it was the four of us, me and Lisa and our two girls, and they're young. They're 5 and 7 kind of thing. And we come up upon a herd of bighorn sheep. And the daddy, I'm assuming he was the daddy because nobody else got in the way and everybody let him do what he was going to do. So I'm assuming he was the daddy. And he had these big horns. And so the daddy jumped up on this rock. And he stood there. And he was majestic. He was posing. If he had a cell phone, he'd have taken a selfie. I mean, he was posing. And there I was, leading my family. My family's behind me. His family's behind him. He had more than one wife. I know. And it was like he was communicating to me, and we were communicating. He was saying, "You leave my family alone, I'll leave your family alone. And until you leave, I'm going to stand right here." This is what Hannah's saying. God is lifting her up. She goes on to say, "My mouth boasts over my enemies because I rejoice in your salvation." She does not boast over her enemies because her enemies are wrong. She doesn't boast over her enemies because they're whatever. She's boasting over her enemies because she rejoices in the salvation that God brings. There is no one holy like the Lord. There is no one holy like the Lord. There is no one holy like the Lord. That's a confession. That's not an explanation. That's a confession. I believe. I have chosen to believe that there is no one holy like the Lord. So if the Lord is holy, what does that make him? In charge. There is no one holy like the Lord. There is no one beside you, and there is no rock like our God. Do not boast so proudly or let arrogant words come out of your mouth, for the Lord is a God of knowledge, and actions are weighed by him. The bows of the warriors are broken, but the feeble are clothed with strength. Those who are full hire themselves out for food, but those who are starving hunger no more. The woman who was childless gives birth to 7, but the woman with many sons pines away. The Lord brings death and gives life. He sends some down to Sheol, and he raises others up. The Lord brings poverty and gives wealth. He humbles and he exalts. He raises the poor from the dust, and he lifts the needy from the trash heap. He seats them with the noblemen and gives them a throne of honor. For the foundation of the earth are the Lord's. He has set the world on them. And what is she praying here? What is she acknowledging? What is she confessing here? She's confessing, listen, God, you are God. God, you are Lord. You get to choose. You get to do what you're going to do. If you want to take the poor and make them rich, that's what you do. If you take the rich and make them poor, that's what you do. If you want to take the strong warrior and break his bows, then that's what you do. And if you want to take the pauper and put him at the throne, then that's what you do. And if you want to give this person life, then you give them life. And if you want to take this person to the shield, to the death, then that's what you do. She's acknowledging that God is God and that she is not. And whatever he chooses, whatever he decides, this is what it is. That is beautiful. That is beautiful. Verse 9, he guards the steps of his faithful ones, but the wicked perish in darkness. For a person does not prevail by his own strength. Those who oppose the Lord will be shattered. I don't know, I kind of think she's thinking about that sister wife there. He will thunder in the heavens against them. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give power to his king, and he will lift up the horn of his anointed. Hannah took her hurt to God, and that is beautiful. Hannah committed to God, and that is beautiful. Hannah followed through with her commitment, and that is beautiful. Hannah worshiped, and that is beautiful. And she worshiped right before she took the trek back home without her son. The fifth thing I would share that's beautiful in the story of Hannah is that she was rewarded. In verses 18 through 21, we see Samuel served in the Lord's presence. This mere boy was dressed in the linen ephod. Each year, his mother made him a little robe. He's a little boy. And took it to him when she went with her husband to offer the annual sacrifice for year after year after year. This is what Hannah did. Eli would bless them. May the Lord give you children by this woman in place of the one she has given to the Lord. And then they would go home. Verse 21. The Lord paid attention to Hannah's need, and she conceived and gave birth to 3 sons and 2 daughters. Meanwhile, the boy Samuel grew up in the presence of the Lord. So God said, I'll take the one that you have committed to me, and I'll give you 5 more. Does God always do that? No. I know. It's hard. But He's God. And we're not. And the beauty of Hannah is compared to the ugliness of Eli. Eli's the priest. In verse 27 of chapter 2, a man of God, we don't know who this man of God is, came to Eli and said to him, this is what the Lord says, "Didn't I reveal myself to your forefathers' family when they were in Egypt and belonged to Pharaoh's palace? Out of all the tribes of Israel, I chose your house to be my priest," that would be the tribe of Levi, "to offer sacrifices on my altar, to burn incense, and to wear an ephod in my presence. I also gave your forefathers' family and all the Israelite fire offerings. Why then do all of you despise my sacrifice and offerings that I require at the place of worship?" Now listen to this. This is the words of the Lord to Eli. "You have honored your sons more than me." "You have honored your sons more than me." Hannah placed her God, our God, the God, above everything else. And Eli placed his family above everything else. "Pastor Marty, you're telling me that I'm supposed to place God before my family?" No, I'm not telling you that. You can be relieved. God's telling you that. I ain't telling you that. God's telling you that. I suppose we could focus on the earthly beauty of a pickup truck or a one-handed catch or the mountains or the beach or the swamp or a well-crafted pizza and all the beauty that is. Or we could take our hurt to Him and see that is beautiful. Stay committed no matter what. Stay committed no matter. Do you think there's a little part of Hannah that thought, I'm going to make this commitment and God's going to be impressed that I will make this commitment. And then when I actually have the boy, He's not really going to ask me to give it? You think there was a little part of her that, yeah, probably so. Take our hurt to Him. Stay committed no matter what. Worship in spirit and truth. Worship out of our confession, not out of our explanation. And let God be God. Now see, that is beautiful. A couple of years ago, I took this picture we're going to put up. I took this picture right over here. That's right on the other side of this wall. My office is right over there, and I was here, and it was the evening, and I looked up, and I looked out, and there was that. And so I walked out, and I went out to take a picture of the sunset. Now, sunsets make me stop. I think they're gorgeous, they're beautiful, and all of those things. And I want to say I haven't seen that many sunrises. If God wanted me to enjoy sunrises, He would have made them later in the day. But I have seen a lot of sunsets, and I really like those sunsets. And I go out there, and I go to take this picture of this amazing sunset, because you can see past the trees and the house, you can see the mountains, and that's one of the things I love about sitting in my office. I can just look out and see the mountains, and it's really cool. And so I went over there to take the picture, and right when I was about to take the picture, I heard a whisper. Sometimes I hear these whispers, and I know this freaks some of you out, but I'm just going to tell you, there are times when God speaks. And when He does, it's not your voice, it's His. And what I heard was, back up. And so I backed up and took the picture. Because you can see the beautiful sunset, can't you? What else do you see, Gary? Not so pretty dumpsters. It's kind of like, Marty, your daughter's into photography. Can't she edit that out for you? She could. Even I could edit that part out. I know how to chop it and just make it about the sunset. But I heard back up. And when I look at that picture, God takes the not so pretty and makes it beautiful. What else do you notice about the dumpsters? They're empty. The trash is gone. I know. Let's pray. Father, your truth, not ours. May you use it for your glory. In your name we pray. Amen.